Okay, so we are in the Gemara in Taanis over here on the Yud Gimel original recordings rabbi See there for the not fast version. These are requested that these should be under half an hour. We're going to start from the fourth, the top line. Amar Rav from Bar Papa, Amar Rav Chizda. Rav from the son of Papa said in the name of Rav Chizda, Kol shum mishum evil going to Shivov, the Avel also be mechamim misonin. Any fast that is because of purposes of mourning, for example, Tisha B'Av or a mourner in general, is prohibited to bathe with or shower with hot water or cold water. And Rashi over here explains the reasoning for this is because the rabbis instituted this, and this applies on Tisha B'Av because it's mourning for the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, and this certainly applies for a mourner that one of his seven close relatives, father, mother, son, daughter, brother, sister, or spouse, passed away. So this certainly applies in those cases. However, and the Taisvus over here comes along and says maybe you could use a type of towel that's a little moist to wipe your head with. The Gemara continues in Koshu Mishum Tanu Kagon Taanis Sibor Bechamin also Besoinin Mutter. Anything that is because of reasons of pleasure, for example, a public fast, hot water is prohibited, cold water will be permissible. So we see that there's going to be a difference between if it's for mourning the fast or just another type of fast, just a regular fast in general, in which case the cold water will be permissible. Taisvus, the third one over here, relates that nowadays for other public fasts that we have, it would be permissible, even hot water, on the 17th of Tammuz, the Shavasa B'Tammuz, Som Gedalia. That's according to the Rav Yah. However, Rabbi Yoel, his father, argues on that and says that it's prohibited to use hot water. The Bach points out that certainly Yom Kippur, which is from the Torah, will be a problem to use any type of water. Mara continues. Amr of Idi bar Avin, Rav Idi the son of Avin said, Afan anami tanina v'no alin esamir chatzaos. We also learned that it says that you should lock the bathhouse, which means it's a question. Should you lock the bathhouse over here? How are you gonna lock the bathhouse? Oh, sorry, excuse me. He also learned that what? That there's this difference between the hot water is going to be prohibited on a regular communal fast, but the cold water will be permissible. Why? Because it says that you lock the bathhouse. And Tosfos explains that in the bathhouses, they used to use specifically hot water. The Gemara continues and says, Amar le abai v'ibesoinin also soiknes naharos mibai lemisni. And if you want to tell me that cold water is prohibited, so then you should have said you close the rivers, which means how are you going to say close the rivers? If you want to tell me that cold water is prohibited, Rashi explains that you're not allowed to use it. How could you say you're going to close the rivers? How are you going to be able to close the rivers? How is that going to be possible? You can't close rivers over here. So just like you can't close the river, so too Tosfos explains, don't make a diuk. Don't say that you could imply from the statement that you're going to close the bathhouses, that you could infer something from that. Gemara says, no. Amar Rav Shishi B'riyad Rav Idi. Rav Shishi, the son of Rav Idi, said, Abba, my father, meaning Rav Idi, Hachi Kashalei. This is what his question was. This is what he was bothered by. Michti, let's see. Tanan Asab Rechitza. It says a blanket statement in the Mishnah. It's prohibited to bathe or shower. No. Why do you need to say you're going to lock the bathhouses? Rather, we can infer from here that specifically hot water is going to be prohibited. However, cold water will in fact be permissible. In other words, Rashi explains when you say rechitza, you're not allowed to bathe, you're not allowed to wash. Tam rechitza applies just a blanket statement. It refers to both cold and hot water. So then why then does it need to be specified that you're going to lock it? You're going to lock the bathhouses. Rather, no, specifically the hot water you can't use, but the cold you could use. Mar continues. Lema Messiah lay. Kol chayvei tviyos. Anyone who's obligated to immerse themselves in the mikvah is allowed to do so, whether on Tisha B'Av or whether on Yom Kippur. So let's say Rashi explains that this is going to be a proof to Rav Chizda, who says that any time that there's a fast for purposes of mourning, you're not even allowed to use cold water. Because in the case of someone who's obligated to immerse himself in a mikvah, such as a nida or someone who just gave birth, is allowed to do so even on Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur. However, let's continue in the Gemara B'mai. What are we talking about? What type of water are they allowed to use? Ilim b'chamin. If you want to say that we're talking about hot water, that's what they're allowed to use. Tefillah b'chamin mi'ika. Are you allowed to use hot water? She'uvininu. It's considered drawn water, which means how are they going to heat up the hot water? They're going to heat it up by putting it in a vessel, in a kli. Once they put it in a vessel, then guess what? It's considered draw water, and you can't use that for the mikvah. Ela lav b'soinin v'chayvi tefillos in. Inish achrina loy. That you can't use the drawn water. Elalav besoinein v'chai v'tilus ein in the shachrini lo. Rather, we can infer from over here that specifically it must be referring to cold water, and specifically someone who is obligated in tevila is allowed to do so, but in a shachrina, but another person is not allowed to do so. And Rashi explains over here someone who's obligated in tefillah, it's tefillah bezman and mitzvah. When you're immersing in the mikvah, that itself is a mitzvah because you're hastening to purify yourself. So therefore, it's permissible to other people. They're not allowed to use hot water nor cold water. Amar of Chana. Oh, so that's what we see from over here. So they can't use any type of water. Amar of Chana Bar Katina. So Chana the son of Katina says, "Lo nitzrich el nechame Tver." No, we're talking about the hot water from Tiberia. So therefore, someone who's obligated in tefillah is allowed to do that, but other people are not allowed to do that. However, cold water will in fact be permissible for everyone. Yehachi, if that's so. So the waters from Tiberia, they wouldn't be drawn water, and therefore they would be kosher for someone who is obligated to immerse himself in the mikveh. Ihachi, if that's so, Ema Sefer, what about the later part? Amir Yechani and Sagana Kohen, Yechani and Sagana Kohen said, Kedai hu basically lav, it only no tefillah pamachas b'shama, that it was worthwhile for the house of our God to lose out on tefillah and going in the mikveh one time in the year. Martin, if you want to say if you want to say that cold water is permissible to wash, and so why don't you just wash with cold water? We're talking about in a place that doesn't have cold water. In other words, Rashi explains if we're going to say, like we just said, that cold water is permissible, so then why is Rav Chanina answering the Tana comment saying, "Oh, it was worth it for us to lose out on the immersing in the mikveh"? What do you mean? Even though that you can't use hot water, but you could use cold water. Rather, we could see from over here that even cold water you're not allowed to use. That's why he said that we're going to lose on the tefillah. No, Rav Papa said, really, we're talking about the hot springs of Tiberia. And that's why there's a difference between if you're obligated in tefillah, you could use it. If not, not. But a cold water, according to everyone, will be okay. Why do you say that we're going to lose out on the tefillah? That's in a place where you don't have cold water. So it comes out that this is not going to be a proof for Rav Chizda. Tashma, come and listen. Another proof, not like Rav Chizda, but now we're switching gears a little bit. This part doesn't matter so much, but when they said that it's prohibited to work, that's only talking about during the day, but it's night. It's permissible to work. Rashi says a chiddush over here. According to Rashi, he says that even on Tisha B'Av you're allowed to work at night. This is very questionable. If you look at the Masoros Hashasi Mosafos, they quote a Magen Avram in Simin Tovkov Nun Dalet in Sivkot Nun Chav Gimel. It's really at the end of the Simin, the Magen Avram over there, who says Sarachin on this. In other words, Tisha B'Av you're not allowed to work even at night because you're diverting yourself from the morning period. You can't have Hesach Hadas from the Avelos. But anyways, the Gemara over here continues. When they said you're not allowed to put on shoes, that's only talking about in the city, but on the way it's going to be permissible. Okay, that's so. It's when you go out to the waist, then you put on your shoes. When you enter into the city, then you remove them. When they said it's prohibited to bathe and shower, that's only talking about your entire body. However, your face, hands, and feet are going to be permissible. And similarly, you find such an idea with someone who is excommunicated or a mourner. Right? So the Gemara says, "My love akuluhu." Is this not going on everything? Which means that which you said that you find this by someone who is excommunicated or an avil, it's not going on everything that we just said, including bathing. And we can infer from here that on a public fast, Rashi explains it's prohibited to wash your entire body, even cold water. So this is a knockout to Rafram Bar Papa in the name of Rav Chizda, who said that cold water you're allowed to use on a public fast. The Gemara says, what are we talking about? If we're talking about hot water, are you allowed to wash your hands, your face, hands, and feet with hot water? Rav Sheish says, someone who's mourning, it's prohibited for him to stick his finger in hot water. Rather, we're talking about cold. And therefore, we have the question, as we just said, to knock out. Because you're not allowed to use even cold water. Before we said you could in a public fast. No, really, I'll tell you, it's specifically referring to hot water. But you said, and similarly, we find such an idea by someone who is excommunicated or a mourner asharakai. It's going on the others, and therefore we don't have a question on Rav Chizda, which means it's going on the others that we mentioned, aka putting on the shoes and the bach eds and malacha, working and anointing yourself. But really, bathing in hot water that's going to be prohibited. However, the cold water will be permissible. Gemara continues and says, Toshmo, come and listen. Dam Rav Abba Kohen, Mishum Rabbi Yosef Kohen, Rabbi Abba Kohen to the name of Rabbi Yosef Kohen. Maisa, there's a story you may see Bon of Shel Rabbi Yosi, Ben Rabbi Chanina, that the children of Rabbi Yosi, the son of Rabbi Chanina, passed away. V'rachas b'soin and Kol Shiva, and they bathed themselves with cold water for all 7 days. So that's going to be a question on Rav Chizda, who said when you're mourning, you can't even use cold water. The Gemara answers, no. Hasam kishkafu avlo havi. Over there, we're talking about it was back-to-back mourning. Tanya, because it said takvu avilav zalachzet. You have the back-to-back mourning. Hiktu tzadro make a batar. If your hair became heavy and long, so then you're allowed to lighten it up by cutting it with a razor. Makabit ksusa b'mayim, and you're allowed to launder your clothing with water. Amar Rav Chizda batar v'lobim misperim. We're talking about you're using a razor but not scissors. B'mayim v'lobim nesir b'chol. We're talking about specifically water, not other cleaning agents such as sand. So they used to use back then. They didn't have detergent. Rashi explains over here when we said that you're allowed to cut your hair, cut it. You can't do a full like shaving and everything. Tosfos explains over there. Um, Continuing in the Gemara, Amar Rava says the novels Motul B'Sayin Kol Shiva Midi Havi Basur B'Chamra, that someone who's in mourning is permissible for him to bathe in cold water for all 7 days, similar to that he's allowed to eat meat and drink the wine. Meisvei, we have an attacking statement over here. In a Bagaris Rashal Navis Atumim Avelaviv Hanar Rashai, that a Bulgaria, someone who's 12 and a half, she's not allowed to make herself look disgusting when she's in mourning for her father. But a Naira who is 12, she's allowed to. Someone under 12 for sure isn't obligated at all in any of this because she's too young. Now, the reason why someone 12 and a half isn't allowed to make herself look disgusting because she's already getting close to marriageable age. My law, Brochitas, is not talking about that she's allowed to bathe, the Bulgaris, when she's 12 and a half. The Gemara says, "My, what are we talking about? If we're talking about hot water, she's not allowed to make herself look disgusting. AKA, she's allowed to bathe in hot water, can't bathe." That Rav Chizda already said that we learned that someone who's in mourning, it's prohibited for that individual to stick his finger in hot water. Rather, it must be with cold water, and still she's not allowed to wash with. Still the naira. Someone who is 12 is not allowed to wash with cold water. So we see from here that what? The Bulgaris is, but the Naira, someone who is 12 is not allowed to. So we see that someone who's mourning, you can't even use the cold water. Right? Rava said before, you could use cold water. Now we see that you're not allowed to. So Gemara says, Elalav. Pirchos. No, it's going on mascara and something that's used for the hair, like to braid the hair or something. Nothing to do with bathing. That's the idea over here. Says the Gemara, let's say there's going to be a proof for him. There's a story. Rabbi Abba Kohen said the name Rabbi Yosef Kohen. There's a story in the children of Rabbi Yosi, the son of Chanina. They died. And he washed himself with cold water for 7 days. So how did he do that? No. Amri, they said over there, Hassam, over there, what's the that's when the morning was back to back, like we just saw. We just saw that exact Gemara. Ikadamri, some say another version. Amarava, Aval is also Kol Shiva. Someone who's mourning, it's prohibited for him to use cold water for 7 days. What's the difference between meat and wine, which would be permissible? Hassam, over there was just to lahafik daigo, to undo his worry. That's why we allow that, unlike over here when it comes to the bathing. Lame Messiah say this is a proof to him. The Bulgar is someone who's 12 and is not allowed to make herself look disgusting. But the 12-year-old is allowed to. But what are we talking about? And Bulgar is Rasha. If we're talking about hot water that she's not allowed to make herself look disgusting with, aka that she's allowed to use hot water. That someone who's in mourning is prohibited for him to stick his finger in hot water. So it can't be hot water. And rather must it be that we're talking about cold water? Lo akichu pirchos. No, it is talking about mascara and the braiding the hair, like we just said before. Someone who's in mourning, it's prohibited for that individual to do laundry for a duration of 7 days. Someone who's mourning, it's prohibited for him to wash his entire body with hot water or cold water for 7 days, but his face and his hands and his legs with hot water is going to be prohibited. However, with cold water will be permissible. Avala such afilu koshu aser. But when it comes to anointing, even a small amount is going to be prohibited. V'im lahaver svum mutter. But if it's to remove the filth, then it will be permissible. Next Gemara, period. That ends all that. Shloisa de Taanis heisim mid kadinon. The prayer that we say on the fast. Where do we mention it? AK. This is talking about Aneinu. Adabre Rav Yehuda Rav Yitzchak Bari. Rav Yehuda escorted his son Rav Yitzchak V'darash, and he expounded the following idea: Yochid keep a love Taanis and Spalo shall Taanis. Individual accept when an individual who accepts upon himself a fast is permits. So then he davens the davening that we say in a fast. Eke Anenu Veheichon Oimram. And where does he say a bingo el the right between the bracha of Gaal Yisrael and Rofech Aleim Yisrael? So this is talking about. Oh no, Goel Yisrael. Sorry. This is talking about in the beginning of Shemona Esrei over here, right? We have the bracha of Re'eh, and it ends Goel Yisrael. So between that and before we start Befeinu Hashem v'nerafa, bracha ta Hashem rofech le'am Yisrael, that's where you're going to put it. So the Gemara says, Maskif lo Rav Yitzchak v'yachach ve'bracha la'atzmo. Rav Yitzchak makes an attacking statement. Could an individual establish a bracha for himself? Is he that important that now he can have a bracha just for him? Add another bracha. Elo Rav Yitzchak b'shemei tefillah v'chinam Rav Sheish b'shemei tefillah. Rather, Rav Yitzchak says no. You insert this in the bracha of Shemona Esrei of Shemei tefillah, and also Rav Sheish says that as well, which means it's on its own bracha. It's in the middle of the bracha. Meisvei, we have an attacking statement. Tosfos over here says, by the way, that this is the halacha, that you put it in Shemei tefillah, and an individual does not establish his own independent bracha. So you say Anenu in Shemei tefillah, and you say it before you say the end of the bracha, before you start Kiyat Hashem Shemei tefillah Amcha Yisrael Barachim, etc. You say Anenu right over there. Don't conclude with it. Rather, after you say Kiyat Hashem Bo Tzara Moshiach, and then afterwards you say Kiyat Hashem etc. And then you say Baruch Hashem Shemei tefillah. However, the Chazon, he puts it in by the bracha, an independent bracha between Goel Yisrael and Rifainu. He puts it right over there. Meis, we have an attacking statement. There's no difference between an individual and a congregation. Rather, this one is going to daven 18, aka the individual, and this one's going to daven 19. Rashi over here explains that back then it was only 18 brachas. They added Vilamal Shinim later because of for the heretics. So the idea over here is that nowadays it would be 19 and 20, but you got the idea. What's an individual and what's a congregation? If we're talking about an actual individual, an actual congregation is referring to the chazan. Is it only 19 or it's 24? Which means there are 24 brachas that are said on a fast. We're going to learn about it on Tes Vavam and Aleph later on. So how did you say over here that it's only going to be 19? Rather, this is what it must it not be that this is what it's saying. There's no difference between an individual who accepted upon himself an individual fast versus an individual who accepted upon himself a communal fast. Except this one, the individual fast is going to be 18 brachas, unlike the communal, which is going to be 19. We can infer from here that what? The individual is going to establish a bracha for himself. So that's going to be a question to Reb Yitzchak that we said before. He said before that you can't establish a bracha for yourself, but now we see that you could. No, really, I tell you, it's referring to the chazan. But you asked a question, that the chazan is going to be saying 24 brachas. We're talking about over here the first three fasts for a drought, where there would not be 24 brachas, because the first three fasts are already going to be more lenient, as Rashi explains. And we wouldn't. There's no difference between the first three fasts and the next three fasts, which are called the middle ones. Rather, that the difference between if you're allowed to work or not. The first three fasts you're allowed to because they're not as stringent, but the next three you're not allowed to. But when it comes to the brachos, they're the same. When it comes to 24 brachos, they're both equivalent. Tanavishir, he left it out. He left out this idea over here. Mashir the Haishir, what do you leave out? How do you leave it out over here? Like, what's going on over here? You left it out? And furthermore, Kitani says there's no difference between the two. Rather, he was just referring to things that are prohibited, not to the actual davening. Which means it's not the norm for him. Mashir, the Hashir Rashi explains, it's not the norm for him to just leave something out. Rather, the answer is really the 24 first ones, they don't exist over here. He wasn't talking about them. So it comes out, he mentioned just the difference between if you're allowed to work or not. He didn't mention the difference between the 24 brachos or not. And aka the first three fasts you wouldn't mention, and the next three you would. By same an additional answer, even the middle ones, I'll tell you, you don't even say the 24 brachas. Those are only for the next ones, after the middle ones. Consequently, there would be no difference regarding this matter between the first ones and the middle ones. Therefore, he didn't mention this difference. Velo, and this wouldn't be so Tanya, but the Brisa says, Ein being gimel shniya is sheva achinayinus. There's no difference between the three fasts which are going to come second after the first three, then there's going to be another three, to the seven later ones. So you're going to have three, three, and then seven. That's how many fasts, three different groups. It's just with these, you're going to blow the shofar and lock the stores. But regarding everything else, they are equivalent. The last ones are more stringent, so you even have to lock the stores. Maybe you'll say, he left it out over here also. He says no difference between the two. V'tizra, and is that logical? Aim bain davka, that you want to say that whenever it says there's no difference between the two, it's specific. V'hashi or teva, but you left out the case of the teva, where you would bring it to the public square in the middle of the street, and that wasn't in the Mishnah. But the last ones, you would do that. On Das Tesvav, we're going to learn about it more. Where it says imishum teva lav shiur. If you're talking about the teva, you didn't leave anything out over there. Something that is private, that was taught, aka when you blow shofar in the shul. Also the 24 brachos. However, something that's public you didn't teach, aka bringing the teva to the shul. Yeah. Comes out this could be going like Rav Yehuda. That you would say it being Goal or Rofa, between Goal and Rofa. Mar continues. Amravashi, Masnisa Nomi Daiko, we could even make an inference from our Mishnah that you would say 24 brachos. The Ketani, it says Ma'ilu Yuseyos Rishonos. How are these better than the first? This is on Yud Beis that we said. We said this is out of the Mishnah over here. The first one you're gonna blow shofar, and the second set of fasts you're gonna blow shofar, and you're gonna lock the stores. But regarding everything else, they're gonna be equivalent. Maybe over here also you're gonna say Hachanami Tanav left it out. Ma Elu Kitani, but it says that one's better than the others. There's a difference. For Tizra Ma Elu Davkahu Vashir Lativ, and you mean to tell me that it's specific that one's gonna be better than the other, but you left out the case of the Teva. It's because you left out the teva. Don't worry about it. It's going to be mentioned in the next parak. Now that we're coming on to that, the 24 brachos, it's not considered that you left it out because we're going to learn about it in the next parak. Maya Haviala, what's the bottom line halacha? Rav Shmuel bar Sasaritai. Rav Shmuel, the son of Sasaritai, said, "V'chein Amar Rav Chia bar Ashi Amar Rav." And similarly, Rav Chia, the son of Ashi, said the name of Rav being Gol and Rofa. You say it between Gol and Rofa. Rav Ashi Amar Rav Ashi says, "Mishmei de Rav Yanai." The name of Rav Yanai, Brio de Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yishmael, b'Shemei Tvila, Chasab b'Shemei Tvila. You say it in Shemei Tvila, and that's the bottom line. You say it in Shemei Tvila, like we already saw in Taisvos on the previous daf. Stop here.